The story was loosely inspired by a true event that occurred on Halloween. More details during and at the end of the story. It was the Halloween night of 2010 when my boyfriend and I watched a horror movie in the living room where all the action and thrill taking place caused the steady beating of our hearts to suddenly rise. So, gazing upon him, the softness in his eyes prompted us to cuddle amidst the tortures and loud hollers displayed on the screen. The film was called Scary Movie, and my boyfriend was so ecstatic that he couldn't stop talking about it on the phone a few days prior before coming over to watch it with me. I eventually got bored a quarter through, only expressing my dissatisfaction by exaggerating my yawn and looking drowsy. I got up and expressed to him that I wanted to give candy to the kids who were out trick-or-treating.
So Paul, care to join me?
I asked, optimistic that my boyfriend would want to spend more time with me instead of watching that silly film. I've got work the following morning, and I need to sleep early anyway. I'll just go ahead and hit the hay, he replied as he headed upstairs. Then, moments later, I turned off all the lights in the house while the ones on the porch were kept on. I sat a chair close to the front door and waited for the kids to drop by the house with their relentless enthusiasm for free sweets while I scrolled through my phone, getting updated on social media regarding my friends' Halloween activities. Moments later, a couple of kids arrived, knocking on my door. I opened it as they all said in unison, "Trick or treat!" So, as I came out to greet them, I gave them handfuls of candy in an attempt to empty out the remaining treats in the bowl. I remember seeing the majority of trick-or-treaters dressed in a Scream costume, keeping in mind that the horror series, or at least the costume, was a huge trend at the time. As the night progressed, I eventually ran out of candy, so it was time to turn off the porch lights and head back to the living room. But as I approached the living room, I heard another knock, somewhat louder than before. I tried to ignore it, thinking that if I did, the kids outside would be convinced that I had gone to bed, and that they should turn to my neighbor in case they had any sweets left. However, the person on the other side of the door didn't seem to get the memo and remained persistent, so I was beginning to feel irritated. But since they were children, I reminded myself to go easy on them. Taking a deep breath, I walked toward the foyer and opened the door wide. Initially, I was supposed to politely tell the kids that I was out of sweets, but what I saw caught me off guard. When standing before me was a tall man wearing a Scream mask with its large tongue that gave it its creepy look. I could tell that he was definitely not a kid, and aside from his size and broad shoulders, he tilted his head to one side and said in a raspy tone, I stood there, stunned and unable to move. I wanted to shut the door on him, but was afraid that if I did, he'd try to forcefully enter the house like in the movies. While staring at me, I couldn't tell what was going through his head because of the mask he wore. However, moments later, he held his bag out, forcing me to give him treats.
I am so happy to be in your candy shop. And no, I don't want to lick your lollipop, but I do want some delicious candy. Oh yeah! So make sure to fill this bag to the brim, tramp, or else...
He threatened, in a sinister, harsh-sounding tone that made me sweat. However, I still tried to keep my composure.
Hilarious, dude. Happy Halloween. Your costume's pretty spot on.
I complimented, hoping he wouldn't notice how frightened I truly was. And then, in a matter of seconds, silence ensued. He straightened his posture, putting down his hands as he stared at me.
Do I look like a clown to you? I didn't come here to kid around.
And suddenly, things got pretty serious. For reasons I couldn't explain, something didn't feel right, because it was unusual for adults to go out trick-or-treating, especially alone. It was also suspicious that he'd prefer to go trick-or-treating late at night, when most people were already asleep at this time. I mustered the courage to give him a piece of my mind and told him honestly.
Leave me alone or I'll call the cops.
I slammed the door, but was appalled to see the guy sticking his foot out to prevent the front door from completely closing. Without a doubt, I knew this man came to my house with malicious intentions, and so I hollered as loud as possible, and the only word that came to mind was help! As soon as the creep entered the house, he shut the door behind him and yanked down a large knife. Scurrying away from him, I was bothered by the possibility of getting stabbed, and so I ran up the stairs while the creep was in pursuit. Moments later, as I reached my bedroom, I instantly locked the door and noticed my boyfriend under the covers, sleeping like a baby. I ran towards the bed to alert him as to what was going on. However, I gasped when the events took a different turn as I lifted the covers and found many pillows instead of my boyfriend. When I turned to look behind me, the creep had already barged in. I inched back as he slowly advanced, dangling a knife in his hand.
Please! Please get away from me!
What's the matter, dear? Are you expecting someone to save you? You know what? I hate noisy, greedy girls like you who only think about themselves.
Please just tell me what you want and leave me alone! You can take anything in this house, I promise!
Anything?
He asked, in a hoarse and menacing tone. I nodded, hoping he would eventually spare me. However, like a rabid animal, he sprinted towards me, and all I could do was scream. Had she watched Scary Movie with me, things might have been different. Too bad, though. She never should have interrupted me during my favorite movie. The story was loosely inspired by two crimes that were committed during the time of Halloween. Both victims in each respective cases just so happen to be the culprit's girlfriends. Here's the image of the first culprit who ended up getting sentenced to 35 years in prison. Here's an image of the second culprit. What makes this case a little more chilling was how he wore this exact same devil mask when going on the prowl.